Please welcome Representative Kim to the stage.
Good evening, everyone. How are you doing? I'm really grateful to be here, and I recognize that I'm probably in a room where I haven't had the chance to be able to meet many of you in the past, but I hope that this is the start of a really extraordinary relationship going forward in which what we can do for this country in terms of moving us into a new era of public service. I thought I'd use this moment to just give you a little bit of a sense of why I feel this fire within me about service, and I want to share with you sort of two elements of my life that have instilled that in me. One is my parents. This year is actually 50 years since my parents immigrated from South Korea to the United States. It's amazing. I'm very proud of them. And look, they had, they came from a very difficult childhood growing up. My dad was born with polio. He was someone who was, abandoned by his parents, left to be raised in all sorts of circumstances, was even homeless for part of his childhood. My mom was born to a poor farm family, to a single mom in an area devastated by the Korean War. But America took a chance on them 50 years ago, brought them in, gave them an education. And my father, who I told you was, a polio survivor, homeless for part of his childhood, ended up getting a PhD in genetics here in America. And my mom... My mom ended up getting a nursing degree, served the hospital systems, and they had this line that they taught me when I was younger. They said, service isn't just a job, it's a way of life. It's not just something you do 9 to 5 and then you hang it on up. It's about your fundamental relationships to the people around you and your responsibility to them, regardless of whether they are friends, family, or strangers alike. My father, as I told you, a survivor of polio, saw great minds and scientists nearly eradicate from the world the plague that disabled him. And he wanted to try to cure the next great diseases, dedicated his life to trying to cure cancer and Alzheimer's. My mother, as I told you, a nurse, trying to be there for people in their darkest times. They taught me that. So I decided that I wanted to serve as well. Now, I ended up deeply disappointing them by not becoming a doctor or a lawyer, but instead I decided to step up and serve in government. And the reason why that happened is because, I was a sophomore in college when September 11th happened. Being a Jersey kid, thinking about the challenges that we face as a nation, I decided on that day that I would dedicate my life to this country to be able to support the national security of this country. And it has been quite the journey of being there in college, making that pledge on September 11th, then finding myself in a career in diplomacy and national security. So the 10th anniversary of September 11th, I was out in Kabul, Afghanistan, serving as a civilian advisor to General Petraeus and General Allen at the time. And then on the 20th anniversary of September 11th, finding myself now as a congressman of the community that raised me, being back at ground zero, trying to think about what the last 20 years has meant to not only me, but this country, but also thinking about what the next 20 years means. As I told you, those are the maxims that my parents have instilled in me about that fundamental relationship. And now I find myself to be a father of a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, 2 little troublemaking little boys. And I try to think about what can I do to instill in them the same lessons that my parents instilled in me. And I find myself in a different kind of service than my parents were. I find myself now in elected office at a time when we all know this is a toxic and challenging time to sometimes be in politics, especially as myself, I've been a Democrat that won a district Trump won, finding myself constantly in the middle of these battles that are there. And, I sometimes wonder whether or not they're learning the right lessons from my example. And then one day, I'll just share with you this story. I was playing some, pickup football with my kids in our front yard. And, of course, with a 6-year-old and 8-year-old, 2 boys, within about 2 minutes, they start fighting with each other. And I see my older son look to my younger son, and he looks at him. He's like, I'm not going to vote for you. And then my younger son looks at my older son, he's like, well, I'm not voting for you. And I'm like, what is happening? I realize that, they are trying to say the most hurtful thing that they can think that they can say to another human being. Being the sons of politicians, they know that the most hurtful thing you can say to me is, I'm not gonna vote for you, So I'm just like, I'm like learning. I'm like, I hope they're learning the right lessons, though, that this isn't just about politics for politics' sake, right? And, when I knew that I felt like things were on the better path is I talked at a parent-teacher night with my kids' teacher, my older kids' teacher. And she told me this story. She said that we did this exercise recently where we got all the kids in the class to talk about what their parents do as sort of like a public speaking exercise, get them to be able to talk in front of each other. And when your son came up, I asked him, what do your parents do? What does your dad do? And your son just said one sentence. He just said, my dad tries to help people. Didn't talk about, thank you. Didn't talk about the title, didn't talk about where I work, didn't talk about what I do in the professional sense, but just right to the core, just trying to help people. And I think that that's what I feel so blessed with right now, is just trying to make sure we don't lose sight of what it is that we do. The fact that this is named after a great man that I had the great honor to be able to work alongside in his final years, it's humbling. And my last conversation with him, with John Lewis, I asked him, what does this moment in America mean to you? As someone who has lived through history, someone who has carried the scars of history on his back. And he said, look, this is a moment of history in this country. And that was powerful to hear from someone who has had that kind of experience in his life. But he also taught me and said to me that history is determined by those who step up. And I think it's so important that, yes, we live in turbulent times. These are challenging times. But we have to recognize that it doesn't have to be this way. And we can fix it. And as someone who's worked at the White House before, at the Capitol before, one thing that I always see above, in the ceilings above, whether that's the Oval Office or the Rotunda, is that phrase, e pluribus unum. Out of many, one. You all know that. But I think the way it's framed as if it just happens, that out of many, one. It just happens automatically. That's not true. Where is the verb in there? Where is the verb that tells you how do you get from out of many, one? And I truly believe that verb is serve. It is about service. That is how you try to knit this together. So I just say, with all the challenges that are out there, the answer to the problems that we face right now is to energize and ignite a new era of public service in America. And I hope to be able to work alongside with you to be able to do that and set an example for my kids, and your grandkids, so we can recognize and show them that they are not doomed to grow up in a broken America, that we can fix it, but it's going to take hard work, and I hope to work alongside you to do it. Thank you, everyone.